everyone, and welcome to the Cloverly Academy. My name is Sophia Wardell, and today we have a very special guest, actress and fantasy author Mary Coe. Mary Coe is the author of the four-part series The Aliquian. Mary also has a BFA in musical theater from the University of Michigan and has performed in regional and professional productions all over the country. Thanks for joining us today, Mary.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, we're so excited to have you. So, today I want to talk about writing tips. So, Mary, your novel features a protagonist who finds solace in sketching. Do you have any personal creative outlets that influence your writing process?
Yes, so I have so many personal creative outlets that have helped me in my writing. I think starting out as an actress and kind of that being my main focus for the bulk of like my young adult life from the time I went to college and graduated and then moved to New York City and was pursuing acting full time. That really has helped to inform just anything in my life, whether that's confidence or having like a really intense work ethic. I think being a writer, you have to be very resilient and you don't necessarily always have somebody peeking over your shoulder saying, hey, you got to sit down and write today. That kind of comes from yourself. And I think a lot of what I learned as an actress helped to inform that. It's like you got to show up, even if nobody's telling you to be there. You got to get to auditions, you got to take dance classes, you got to go to your voice lessons. But on like a deeper level, I think it was songwriting and poetry that really helped bring me into the writing space a little bit more when I was a performer. So those are still things that I do all the time. I have a little studio set up in my office where I can sing or, make music. I love to write poetry and had a big poetry account for years that, has kind of been more on the wayside since I started becoming, taking the full author route. But so many. I still take dance classes and yeah, tons of them.
Well, that's fascinating. It's great to have all those creative outlets, especially the writing, poetry, in that creative way that can kind of feed into fantasy. Now, structurally, do you outline your novels extensively, or do you prefer a more organic approach to storytelling?
I think my approach to outline tends to be pretty structured at first. So when I first started to research novel writing, because I'd never done anything even relatively along the lines of entering a journey that I knew was going to be, it was going to take some time to learn how to write a book and especially a fantasy novel and a fantasy series. I knew I was going to need to like have some structure in place or at least like a touchstone that I could go back to every now and again in case I was lost or meandering in my work. So I found the Snowflake Method, which, if any other authors have heard of it, I'm sure tons of people have. But it essentially starts out with a really simplistic idea and then just expands. So you start with one sentence that essentially encapsulates the entirety of what that novel will be about, which sounds like it might be an easy thing, but it isn't at all. And it took me like probably a full week to actually get one solid sentence that I was like, you know what? I'm proud of that sentence. I can use that as a very simple elevator pitch to anybody if they were to walk up to me and be like, what's your book about? But you essentially branch out from that and you turn that sentence into a paragraph and then you turn that paragraph into a page. And then before you know it, you do that for all of your characters where you start with one sentence and then paragraph page and you kind of have a grid of where you're at least starting with. And then usually what I do from there is I have a chapter by chapter sort of breakdown. But once I get to that place, as I'm writing the first draft, usually, I let the characters then take me on the journey. So I'm like, you know what? I have my outline, but that could change at any point. So I'm just open to it. And usually the characters start to write themselves anyways. And you just kind of let go and go, okay, my chapter outline's probably going to change several times, but it'll be worth it in the end because usually they tell you where they want to go.
Right. It's a great way to get the flow started. Now, that's a great point. I want to stay a little bit on character development and world building since we're on that topic. How do you ensure that the readers feel immersed in a fantasy setting when you're trying to balance the world versus the characters?
That's such a great question. I feel like that is the age old question for a lot of fantasy authors. And it's something I ask myself constantly is how do I balance setting up the political structure and also making sure that my character's story is told. And one thing I learned really early on in my writing journey was, especially with fantasy, you want to kind of set up a little bit of a structure at first. You want your reader to know, okay, here's the basic government system that we're looking at. It's not like ours, or maybe it is like ours in some ways. But as the action of the story starts to take, precedence, then your characters can kind of tell you where there are certain moments where world building has to become centralized. So it's not just like you're info dumping at the beginning of the novel and
Right.
then, going back into your character and you're like, I don't even remember this person and what they were doing before they told me about, the governor of their region for years and years. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm still learning how to master. And I think so many fantasy authors feel the same way. But at the end of the day, if you have a great editor who is reading your work and can say, hey, you know what? That piece of information, let's move it here because I think it's more relevant to this part of the story. I've been so grateful to work with an editor who really understands that and has much more experience when it comes to knowing when certain pieces of information are important to be revealed versus let's just focus on your character's development.
Now, lastly, I want to ask you, what techniques do you use to maintain suspense and mystery throughout a multi-book series?
So there are lots of techniques that I use for creating mystery and intrigue, but I think some of the best ones that I've come across have been in this book called Techniques of the Selling Writer. And it's by another fiction author named Dwight V. Swain. He wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance. And this is kind of like my book Bible. I go to it all the time if I'm like, hey, I'm just confused about where the story needs to go from here. And the biggest thing and biggest piece of advice that I could give to other authors is to really hone in on the scene sequel elements of writing. And it's kind of like a scientific approach to how to get people to not be able to put the book down. So it's like you have your scene chapter and then a sequel chapter and then a scene chapter and a sequel chapter. So you have your scene, which is your protagonist's goal right at the beginning of the chapter, the obstacle that they are facing, whether that's, from outside of them or internal. And then you have like a big disaster that happens at the end of the chapter. So that's your scene. And then you have your sequel chapter, which is what is your character's reaction after they've been put in this horrible disaster? And then you have a dilemma. It's like a question between two options that they're given. Like, are they going to fight or are they going to flee? And then you have the decision at the end, which is no, they're going to stay and they're going to fight. And when you follow that rhythm over, hundreds of pages, you really captivate readers. It's wild to me. The biggest and most positive form of feedback that I've had from readers is once I started your book, I literally couldn't put it down because it really does bring people into the narrative. So that's one of my favorite ways to provide mystery and intrigue and keep people hooked.
Well, Mary, thank you so much. That was wonderful insight on writing tips.
Thank you so much, Sophia.
Lastly, where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Yes, I have a website. It's just my name, maryco.com. You can also find me on Instagram at maryco_let's go. And my TikTok is under the same account name, maryco_let's go.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's interview with actress and fantasy author Mary Coe. Be sure to check out our website for more videos. Wishing you all a fulfilling and successful writing journey.